Welcome to the Infinite Star Connection podcast with your host. I'm Viviane Chauvet and my dear friend Jeff Demers. Jeff, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing okay. A little crazy, but we're doing okay. Getting close to the end of the year, and crap's happening. So trying to stay
Yeah,
ahead of it.
stay in your light, everybody. It's going to be very important. Today we're in for a treat. Today we're going out of space and time. Today we're moving out of the 3D complexity, entanglement, 3D matrix reality. We're moving beyond. We are both of us beyond excited to introduce you to our amazing guest today, David Wallace. Thank you so much for being here, David. Allow me to introduce you because you have an amazing bio, and I cannot wait to hear you talking. You're going to have the floor, my friend. The microphone will be yours. In Just to give you an idea, everyone, in 2008, David experienced physical contact with sentient beings from the Taurus Cloud, Aldebaran Star system when he was taken to a terra-formed planet named Bro Cali. Once there, David was invited to release all of the information he stored his entire life regarding animals, the Earth's actual environment, and humankind's behavior to some 200 ambassadors, scientists, and dignitaries of both the Galactic Council of Scientists and members of the Galactic Federation of Planets. Now, I want to dive into that. His experience with the blues from Taurus has translated into a full-time, full-blown, ongoing physical contact. David has accepted the responsibility of ambassador among the many ambassadors already in service here on Earth and those receiving ongoing training and support for continued affirmation on the ascension process. David is a specialist in astrophysics, telemetry, cartography, optics, and light emissions. He is currently writing several abstracts on four new quantum physics sciences in deep space navigation, exotic sound theorem, and a new quantum hypertext for communicating vast amount of information through mathematic light language, which he calls CLPT and CLPF. The bio goes on and on. David, welcome to our unique podcast.
Thank you. It is my honor and privilege to be here and to sit with both of you. I care very much for both of you, and I really enjoy the brief amount of time that I take to watch your podcast and to watch your guests and to listen very carefully. And one of the most important things that I think all of us can benefit from is the importance of listening and listening very carefully. I'm just going to move to the inside of my kitchen because we're in my shop and it's a freezing cold winter, and we're going to open the door for customers. So it'll just take 2 seconds to move. So just give me one moment.
Absolutely, David. We want you to be comfortable and warm because we're going to dive into a journey all together. And the etheric smell of pies will be distracting as well.
That's totally accurate. It is the smell of pie. Just 2 seconds.
I love pies. Yeah, David is the owner of an amazing pie store at the same time. So
Right.
we're going to combine the delicious and the nourishment of the brain and beyond. So I love this.
Sorry about the juggling around. It's just like you were saying. It's quite hectic. Everyone's trying to get everything accomplished at the same time. My quantum math studies are incidental to my experience. My association with higher mathematics and cognitive functions in our own mind about understanding quantum mechanics, quantum theorem, has not been a strong point for me. I was always a maths failure in school. When I was very young, I was terrible at it. By the time I was in 7th grade, I was getting migraines from doing fractions. So I actually limped along and got through State College when I was interested in my career as a wine and spirit specialist, and was able to get a Bachelor's of Science degree in thermodynamics and become an assistant winemaker when I was in my mid-20s. So when I started going back to school, the year after I was removed from our planet, that was January 7th, 2017. The experience, and I'll touch on that in a moment, the experience changed me in such a great, deep, and profound way that it was almost like living in one reality on this planet. And, you know, we're all born and we all have a life and then we pass on. But it was almost like being removed from the reality that I was in and being placed within seconds in a brand new reality, in a brand new life stream where they had arrested and changed my life in a 4-hour period. When I was taken from my home, it was done only after a year of my son and I sitting on our balcony overlooking the ocean in the Western Pacific Hemisphere. And I live in Hermosa Beach in Southern California, and so anyone that looks out on a map can sort of triangulate the view that we have over the ocean. It's quite vast. So on any season, we have 3 or 4 constellations that we see all the time. Like we can always see Hercules, and we can always see Orion, and we can always see the Pleiades. Well, one day we were going home from the bakery, and a very large, very bright green sphere got my son's attention. It was following our car, and my son had me pull over, and I looked out and I saw the sphere. And as soon as my son and I looked at each other and looked back up at it, it flashed twice and shot straight up into the sky. In less than a second, it was already joining the stars that were appearing at twilight. My son and I both knew this wasn't anything from our planet, and so we did what anybody does, and we went home and started researching. And I've always had an open mind, or at least I thought I had. And I'd always liked to believe in miracles and civilizations from outer space, because I've always sort of realized that we can't possibly be the only species. So it was never a part of my life, the understanding of extraterrestrial species. I've come to call them beyond Earth sentients, because all of the acronyms and all of the terms that we seem to use in whatever extraterrestrial discovery community we belong to, they seem to fall short of what they are and who they are and what they represent and why they're here. So I call them beyond Earth sentients, because they're all very sentient, they're all very kind. And when they revealed themselves to me physically, I wasn't that astonished. I was surprised, and I was so happy. You see, my son and I decided that any species that can create a vehicle or perhaps a probe to watch us and communicate with us and then zip it away at this tremendous rate of speed, that they'd have to be far advanced. And any species that's that far advanced is more than likely going to be psychic, psychokinetic, or exhibit some sort of telepathy abilities that are far beyond what we now understand. So we decided to sit on our balcony, and every night from 8 p.m. until 9:30 p.m., we picked one spot in outer space that was sort of directly west and straight up, so that we were always in view of the latter part or the bottom part of the constellation Hercules. We would look for items that were flying through space that were in very deep space. And both of us are pretty smart fellows. We know the difference between stratospheric cruisers and satellites and things like that. So we started to eventually see ships travel from one star to the next in very deep space. And so as soon as we started seeing this, we created a mental mantra. And it was the same for both of us. It was basically, hello, I'm David, only my son would say, I'm William. We see you. We understand that you're here. Won't you please come down to meet us? We're not afraid. We have a life that is based on love and care for our planet. And our planet and our civilization needs help. Won't you please help us? Please come down and see us. We are not afraid. Well, we repeated this mantra for probably 5 months. And, it only takes several times to do it. But once you produce a mental image and a psychic message, you can project that message, and it will continue out into outer space in a form of energy that's difficult to get into and explain at this point. So when the ships are flying out there, they receive the harmonic, they receive the message that we send when we concentrate very powerfully. And one of them finally caught our message as they were flying through deep space. So the ship stopped. And my son and I, whilst in the process of silently sending this message, both reached down and held each other's hands. And the ship stopped and came straight into Earth's upper atmosphere from very deep space. And it did it within a period of about 5 to 10 seconds. And then it started revealing its geometric shape to us. It rotated. It came so close that it couldn't have been more than 2 miles above us. And then it flashed a series of flashes. This is what I call CLPT. It's a form of technology that they use to attenuate the way our mind absorbs information from them. And CLPT stands for Continuous Light Pulse Technology. CLPF is Continuous Light Pulse Frequency. You see, light is a frequency because it behaves just like any other wave. Light travels in waves, it travels in frequencies, it travels either as a compressed form at very, very brightly, or as a very dim form. It can be a large, wide band of light, or it could be a tiny little focused stream like a laser. But the particular being that came and flashed us not only left us with some sort of imprint psychically that it was revealed to us a couple days later, but they had set us up with what I call an attenuation signal. And it's a series of photons or a package of light that enters our eyes, travels down our optic nerve, is processed by our parietal lobes, and then sent down what's known as the diencephalon, which is a central part of the human brain. All of these components that make up our pre-brain, our ancient brain, which is our, medulla oblongata, our spinal, top of our spinal cord. Those are mankind's very ancient, primitive brains that produce enzymes and amino acid responses, such as the fear-flight response. Your higher cognitive functions come from your cerebrum, your right and your left hemisphere. They say that the left controls logic, and they also say that the right is responsible for music and creativity and sculpture. What they had done is they had sent a message with a mathematic structure made from light, which traveled down both of our optic nerves, processed by our parietal lobes, and then was sent to either side or both sides of our cerebral cortex, our cerebrum, and was then attenuated by our brain. Because the human brain, just like the dolphin brain and the brain of the Yeti are all higher species on this planet, is 125 million years old or older, regardless of the genetic enhancements we may have received. Our brain is already set up to understand these very complex light signals because why? Our brain processes light just in the same form of light that it uses whilst communicating to itself in the form of neuronal discharge and emissions. When you have a transmitter and a receptor in your brain, they fire off a small electrical charge in order to connect to each other and transmit that signal. So whatever they had done to us, it came in the form of a package of several lights, and it lasted for about 30 seconds, but it was probably 500 to 1,500 flashes, like really quickly. So William and I were very happy because as soon as it had flashed that light, it went out the same pathway that it had taken, straight out into deep stellar space. And then we saw it amongst the stars. And believe me, the stars are lit brilliantly. over the ocean when it's pitch black, and it just took off like a spaceship, and you could see the other stars it was passing until it was very diminutive and finally disappeared from our vision. Well, William and I decided to make a habit of this, and since this had happened on a Wednesday night, we decided that every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we would sit on our balcony and reach out to them. Well, within a month, now this is 7 months of doing this mantra, within a month of doing that on Wednesday and Thursday night, entire different myriads of ships would come into the space that we had seen. They'd take turns, and you'd see 5 ships collect into the constellation Hercules, and then one at a time they'd come down and they'd visit us. And each ship was different, and each ship gave us a series of flashing bright lights, and we could almost feel like we were being shown with a laser from many miles away, right onto our faces. And then they would go away, and the next ship would come in. It was like they were taking turns, and each ship was different. Around the 9th month of doing this, I started having stronger, higher communication values. I was starting to hear voices saying, "Hello, David, thank you for speaking to us." And then I would say, I put my hand on my pocket on my cell phone, and I'd say, "May I take your picture?" And either the ship would flash and respond a yes or a no, or they would say, "Yes, you may take our picture." And I'd take my camera out and take pictures. So I ended up with some 600 pictures over a 4-month period. On the night of January 6th, 2017,
okay,
I saw a very, very large craft. It was huge. It was the size of 3 or 4 aircraft carrier. It was a giant disc, and it had blue-white lights going all around it until it rotated and showed me its propulsion system. It was the biggest ship I'd ever seen. And it came down about a mile above my head. It rotated slowly. I took some fabulous photographs, which I've shared out to a lot of folks. And I believe, Vivian, I've showed you some of the pictures on my phone when we met in Shasta and visited. And I was left with this beautiful feeling that something special was about to happen. Even though I suppose most people would be frightened, I felt really special. I felt like something really neat was about to happen. Well, I went upstairs to my house because I was walking my dog for her last pee. I went upstairs and I looked at my son and I said, "William, don't lock the sliding glass door." And I said, "Sweetie, if 4 little people come into the house tonight, don't be afraid." Because his bedroom's right next to mine. I know it's the silliest thing to say. I never would have said that, but I didn't tell him about the big ship. I think I was rather galled by the experience. I went straight to bed and passed out. Well, at midnight, which was January 7th, and I've shown you pictures of my little friend Toth looking across the stainless steel bakery table. He's adorable. He's my friend that wakes me up. Well, on that morning at 12 midnight, I'm sleeping on the edge of my king-size bed, and I feel this round, cool melon being pressed against my forehead, and I open my eyes up, and there were these 2 huge blue eyes, and they went blink, and he stepped back 2 or 3 steps, and I heard him say, "Everything's fine. I'm Toast. Everything's fine," in this funny little language. And so I sat up on the edge of my bed, and there was 2 other little tiny ones, smaller than Toth. They were blue-gray, but mostly gray. And there was a taller one who was about 4 foot tall, and he had a tunic on, and it had a starburst on it. And he never said anything. But Toth, apparently, I got to know him quite well. Actually, he's come into my bakery, he's come into my home, and we've spoken. He's very sweet. He was on one of the original ships that got our attention and came down and downloaded to us. And Toth is the one that prepped me for my meeting with Kim Jim to go to the planet Bro Kali. So we're in my bedroom, and Toth is telling number 1 and number 2, the 2 little tiny ones, to be gentle. And they're wiping me down with this green towel that smells like iodine, and it's real scratchy. And so they wiped my whole body down. It was like sterilizing me. And they put me in a hospital smock, a white smock that was like a Nehru collar tunic. And it had a single closure on the front. And I don't remember how they got me out of the house. I was out like a light. But within moments, I was down at the beach on the sand. And there was a blue trapezoidal tent that was made from some sort of light plasma. And I was floating above the sand, and Toth was holding my left hand, and number one, the little one, was holding my right hand, and they're floating me across the sand towards this trapezoid tent, the whole time sending me hundreds and hundreds of downloads on my behavior, the thoughts were things to gird my loins, that I'm going to meet Kim Jim. He's my best friend. I don't know it yet, but he loves me very much. He can't wait to meet me. And everything's fine. And this is my special night and my special experience just for me. And he said, don't worry, we love you. The compassion and the love was overwhelming. And I felt so safe. I felt like a little baby being held by my mother to her breast the whole time. So it didn't matter what I saw or what I was being put through. The whole experience was based on this deep, deep feeling of love. And so I go into this little tent, they release me, and I'm able to walk on my own. And the tent's enormous on the inside. And I go around a couple of little light blue hallways, and then I meet Kim Jim. And he's the most fabulous electric ultramarine blue and teal green skin. He has 3 long fingers. He has a long cranium like a Paracas skull, like one of Dr. Forrester's skulls, the ones in Chile and Peru. And he patted this very cubic, rectangular, bright white settee, and he's sitting on it. He's sort of sitting on his legs. He's got his legs and his feet up on it. But it's very long, and he patted it with his long fingers, and he says, David, come sit next to me. We have a lot to talk about. The first thing I need to discuss with you is human enzymatic responses based on your chemical and emotional values, and I'm going to explain that to you. So Kim Jim and I sat for about an hour and a half talking, and he held my hand. In fact, his fingers were so long it went around my wrist twice, and he was sitting maybe no more than 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from me. He had a mouth, but he doesn't have a larynx, and he doesn't make sounds. He has a pocket in his mouth where you and I have a hole that goes down for breathing and eating. He has none. It's what I refer to as a vestigial mouth. It's sort of no longer necessary. But they eat. Kim Jim's food comes in the form of a liquid, and it's in a little disc with a trapezoid on it, and he puts it in his lips and squeezes it, and it gets absorbed through the skin, his epithelial tissue of the sac that's inside. His species don't have teeth. They have very hard gums, but they no longer have teeth. In fact, one of the downloads that Toth told me on the way in to meet Kim Jim was to try not to show my teeth, because it's sort of similar to like a snarling dog. And so there are a lot of primitive aspects about pheromones and human behavior that's uncomfortable for them. It would be the same thing for you to like perhaps be dropped off into a group of human beings that are behaving very badly and you don't want to be there. So we have to make these observations about our behavior and the way we think and present ourselves to be as open and honest as possible at all times. They never once asked me to love them. They never once told me what to do. But Kim Jim was very clear, and he said, David, we've been following and manipulating your family line for about 2,200 years. He says, but you've only had 3 lives on the planet, and this is your 3rd. But we've been manipulating you as well, and we know that something is going wrong, and we think it's our fault, and we're very sorry. So we're going to explain everything to you, so that you don't have, we see a manifestation in your future where you have a complete breakdown. But that's not going to be your timeline. That's not going to happen in this life. And he said, so we're catching it before it happens. We're going to explain everything to you and tell you what's going on. And so I had uncontrollable tears. I was just like a waterfall. And in a lot of ways, you know, and I know it's ridiculous to be comforted when you're crying. I wasn't crying out of sadness. It was some strange joy. And he said, if you'll allow me. And he took his hand and he put it on the back of my head and the nape of my neck. And he removed all of the bad experiences and memories I'd ever possessed. He took every bad feeling, every bad thought, every bad thing that had ever happened to me that made me feel some sort of emotional pain. And he took all of them away. And he explained to me that human beings are born perfect, but we don't treat our children properly. See, when you're born, you're supposed to go into an advanced creche to be with other babies, special mothers who are great teachers, crystals, art supplies, little animals, and you're supposed to enjoy flowers and grass and nature. But what humans do is they put the child in another room, lock him in a crib, and then they scream at each other in the other room about money. And so the baby human absorbs all of these things, and it damages us on so many levels that you wouldn't believe. So he said, what you need to do is tell people everything that I share with you so that they sort of wake up to new aspects of what's going on. Because after you and I meet, every aspect of your life will change forever. He says, all of your friends who you think are your friends will leave you, but we are replacing them with wonderful people who will be sending through the front door of your pie shop. And he said, your whole life is going to change. And so I started crying again. I felt so free. I felt brand new. I felt like, you wouldn't believe it. I just felt just so innocent and so wonderful and warm and happy. And like no one had ever cared about me the way this unique individual did. And so he goes, let me explain. And he put his hand on the side of my face. And it's funny too, because, you know, I'm a 60s kid. I'm a Star Trek fan. I always like when Mr. Spock did a Vulcan mind meld and touches your face in a certain way. Well, he did the same thing, really. He took his hand and put it on the side of my temple and on my cheek and on the side of my cheek. And he said, I want you to come with me back to Brooklyn in 1920, 1930. You used to be a policeman. And all of a sudden, I'm standing in front of a brownstone in the pissing rain wearing a dark ultramarine blue wool jacket with a badge and big buttons. I'm walking up the stairs of this brownstone, and it's at night, and I knock on the door, and there's a government agent in a fedora and a gray suit, and he hands me a Ziploc bag, and this is like 1930, and it's full of all these tiny, tiny little inch-long, skinny white humanoids, and they're all dead. There's about 40 of them, and they're tiny. They look like pasta, and they have little white eyes with black circles around them, and their mouths are all open, and they look very sad. And then he goes, we found another location. And I said, right. And I put it in my pocket and turned around. And as soon as I sort of shuddered to the rain, Kim Jim pulled me out of that life in Brooklyn in the 30s and then entered me into the next one. And this is really strange. Pardon me. I was a gunner in a bomber in the South Pacific during the Japan campaign. And I took a magnesium round right through the cranium, and I watched my own death. And, you know, I looked exactly the same. I was just younger. I died when I was 23. My name was David. And apparently I was really well liked. But Kim Jim said, we have a really hard time controlling things that happen during war. He said the human mind is so, so powerful. And he says, once you get that ultimate focus, we can't really break in. He said that the idea is to get a hold of you guys before war breaks out to explain what's going on. Because once that whole conflagration occurred, we couldn't stop your death. And I went, oh, because you were part of the family that we had been manipulating for many, many, many years. And he said, so this life is going to be different for you, David. He said, you've had 2 very bad tragedies in your first 2 lives. And we feel very sad about that because we believe that some of the circumstances that caused you that great tragedy and your physical pain was because of what we were doing. And we've changed. So we no longer behave that way. and we're very happy. But he said, we are very sorry for you. So that's why he removed all this pain. But it wasn't just the pain from this life. It was the pain from past lives as well. Everything. So he says, now that you're on a new path, and I've explained to you human nature, are you ready to go? And I was very upset because we're sitting in this beautiful blue electric tent, and I'm sitting with this fabulous species from the Aldebaran system. And I thought they were going to take me back home, so I was very sad. And he goes like this. And so I started crying again because I was so happy. There was this most amazing amount of tears. I had no idea I could cry that much. I was so happy. So we went outside the tent, and we got pulled from our shoulders right up into the bottom of this huge mothership. And he showed me the workings, showed me all of the electromagnetics. And while he was walking me around the lower deck, he gave me the download from Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism and started talking about Ampere's law, Gauss's law, and how all those things are relative to magnetic and gravitational technology that we have, but they've applied it in more of an organic way. Someday we'll sit and talk about organic biological magnetic engineering mechanisms, but now's not the time. So then we stepped onto this blue light pad that had a blue railing, just like a shopping mall escalator. It was made of blue light though. And this pad followed the railing up, and I could see different entities just similar to Toth and similar to the ones that were scrubbing me down for my trip, moving to different aspects of the ship while these giant magnets swayed. And we went through amidships, the floor in the center of the deck. And I'm in a ship that has at least 1,500 large windows. There's over 1,000 different species. Most of them are seated, but many of them are walking around. And Kim Jim, in the center of the ship were these fabulous black sarsens. They look like very geometric, perfectly cut, black polished granite. And in the center were these two beautiful yellow grasshopper beings with sparkly dresses. And they were attenuating these buttons, and there was a hologram of the Earth and the moon above them. And you could see how vast the ship was. It was enormous. And this beautiful young lady with long black silky hair and dark green emerald eyes and a really pretty dress. It was like sparkles and hearts, and it was orange and sparkly and golden. And her name was Erom. And Kim Jim stepped off the platform and helped me get down onto the deck. And he said, I'm going to leave you now and see you exactly in 2 years to the date where I will check on you. I love you. I love you very much, and I've always loved you, David. And so he went away. And then Erom came up, and she took my hand and walked me across the deck, which took some time because it was so bloody big. And it was fabulous. It was like black glass. And she said, don't look at the controllers. They're not very fond of your species. You can gaze at them with peripheral vision only. And so I looked at these two incredible beings pushing these buttons, and I could only see them just in between these big black polished slabs that were in this ring. And then I went up to this other very beautiful, tall fellow named Weimer, who had yellow skin and very tiny little almond-like eyes. And he was very sweet. He had a tiny little smile, and he was holding his hands just like this. And he put me into my chair, and that would take 2 hours to describe, and I don't have the pictures on me, but I'll show them to you the next time we hook up. And it was a fabulous chair made out of green tubes, but it was all energy. And he had me sit down on it, and he folded it around me, and I'm in front of this giant crystal window. And there's an empty chair to my right, and then there's this really good-looking, like, California yuppie couple, but they're both knocked out. They're passed out. But I could see other people or other entities sitting in their chairs looking out the window. And Weimer said, I'm Weimer. I am your deck associate. I am given an opportunity to stay with you for your entire trip. He says, this is the part that everyone likes the most. And I know, isn't that funny? And so the ship lifted up away from the Earth. And I could see the top of the backside of Brazil. I could see the island of Martinique in the Caribbean. And then all of a sudden I was looking at stars, and the Earth was just below the window at a sort of crescent. And we had joined an armada of about 49 other ships, and we were the fifth one back on the right-hand side, and it was shaped like a giant arrowhead. And I'm watching through the window as this really magnificent energy crack went right from the left to the right. And this is a big window. It's about 2 feet thick, and it's about 11 or 12 feet high, and probably just as wide, like a giant rectangle. And this energy crack got bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden these big silver and white and bright blue balls started flying out of it, and they looked like ball lightning. But this is all happening in space. Then the image of the stars below in the window started spinning inwards towards the crack like a wheel, like a cylinder. And then the flat image of the stars in our local group started spinning this way, and all the ships got sucked into this light. And we traveled within that for about 45 minutes to an hour. It was a long time. The way the time association or the time displacement occurs when you're traveling at very, very high speeds is I'm almost unable to relate it in a quick way to you. But I was only gone for 4 hours from Earth, but it was actually a 3 to 4 day experience for me while I was with them. And I can't explain that. I still haven't discovered the mathematics that's helping me understand that. I'm working on some quantum functions right now called Green's theorem, which are very interesting, and they're helping me understand the dilation time differential when you are a mass traveling at a hyperspeed. And it's taken me some time to study these functions because they weren't part of my astrophysics program. So we are flying through this crack, and all of a sudden the ship stops. And we're in outer space, but it's all pink and gold and blue and magenta and sparkly and just so beautiful. There's nothing like the space around our planet, the Kuiper Belt, the Oort Cloud, or any of the local group. It was just amazingly colorful, like a giant nebula. And then there's Aldebaran, the big golden yellow giant, sitting up at the top almost at 11 or 12 o'clock to that quadrant that we were in. So we had traveled some 64 million light years, or 64 light years, from Earth to Aldebaran in a period of like an hour and a half, which is just totally mind-blowing because it's beyond the speed of light. I don't know about the technology. They are able somehow to fold time or fold space, connecting 2 points and releasing them. Yeah. And that's the only thing that makes sense. But
I have a book that describes that.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, this is about you.
Oh, well, I hope we find out what it's about. So when the ship stopped, I'm looking out the window, and I could see very clearly a very black two-dimensional disk that looked like the opening and event horizon of a black hole that was turned on its side. And that I found out many years later through conversations in the form of downloads through CLPT that black hole is a small one that was manufactured by another friendly species so that they can stop the ships when they're going through hyperspace. And it's at just the right distance from the place where they need to stop, which happened to be a terra-formed planet. Sorry, I'm with my son at work. So it was just far enough away not to cause any damage to the group that we were near, but close enough to arrest the velocity of this fleet. And then we all landed on this beautiful, beautiful planet. But it was funny, too, because it's called broccoli, but the trees looked like broccoli. And so for a long time, I was saying I went to the broccoli planet, you know. And then Kim Jim showed up 2 years later as promised and said, David, it's broccoli. It's not the broccoli planet. But what they were doing was they were having, this is 2017, they were having a galactic consultation with many species, many members from the planet Earth. I wasn't the only one. There was probably 60 or 100 others that were all giving testament to environmental devastation, political corruption, the disappearance of species, the 50% tipping point where we can't go back biologically to recover the planet because mankind's greed has destroyed everything. Nuclear waste. But we'll get to that in a second. I had injured myself. And in my zeal to see this beautiful, all the ships landed in this fabulous citadel. All the buildings looked like sparkly white corian or stone. Everything was white and sparkly, but they were beautiful buildings. And there was a coliseum that all of them were going to get to when we did this big release of information to share with one another. Well, I had gone right off the landing ramp, and I had injured my skull, and I was whisked away to someone who was called a Joey Ta'er. They're very fascinating little doctors, and they can repair any species' nervous system, brain damage, spinal cord damage. So if any visiting ambassadors, dignitaries, or anybody gets injured, and all of the major planets in the system have what's called a Joey Ta'er, and this is someone who can go in and fix anything that's wrong with your neurology and your nerve synapse. So I was whisked off to his little hospital, and within moments, he had pulled the piece of skull back, regrown my brain, but all of the memories, and this is really interesting stuff, you guys. I've landed right on my head, and I've pushed a piece of my cranium down. I have a 4-inch long suture, which I've had photographed by a radiologist at Torrance Memorial Hospital, who said that's the most beautiful cranial suture work I've ever seen. Where did you get your brain surgery? And when I told him I'd never had it on Earth, he almost refused. Well, he did. He refused to give me my x-ray, which I finally recently got back through a 2-year petition with the hospital. So I've got my picture. And the other thing that happened was it destroyed all of the emotional memories that I had stored in my right hemisphere. So I don't feel things the way I used to according to what happened. Like, I can't remember whether I was happy or not at Christmas when I was 5. I can't remember what it was like to feel my mom telling me she loved me. It really, really screwed with stuff bad. And he was a little sad for me. But what they did, this is really interesting, is all of our memories that we have photographically stored in our brains are all enzymatic based. They're all based on specific enzymes which carry both a lipid protein, a fatty protein, which constantly feeds that memory, and an electromagnetic response or a pulse, which has mathematical coordinates. So those 1- and 2-dimensional images that you've stored with your eyes and your emotions over your life are a chemical picture, which are stored like a book in your mind. So if you open a book and put both halves of the cover down and you see the pages fan out, the pages on the right are your right hemisphere, the pages on your left are your left hemisphere. And if you could uniquely look at each page and turn it into a 3- or 4-dimensional shape, you can see the millions of memories that all retain a shape. Well, it's because those memories were given an electromagnetic or a chemical enzyme because they were connected to your emotions. The left side of your brain just goes, yep, that was Christmas, you were 5. But the right side of your brain goes, I got the toy I always wanted. I felt so good that year. Well, they removed all, because the damage was here. He said, David, we cannot give you the emotional value of your memories. We cannot replace those enzymes. I'm so sorry. So what he did was he took all the memories that were like stored like 1-dimensional and 2-dimensional photographs. He turned all those memories and activities down, which my brain stores electrochemically, and it was like a deck of cards in a dealer's hands. He just flipped them around and reloaded them to the right side of my brain with a device called a curla. And it's a hollow oblong box, which they put on your head, and it has a gold strap. And on the sides of the curla are these very, very tiny engravings, which looks like Sanskrit. And there's thousands of little words written on the side of the curla, but each one of them has a gemstone embedded in it. And when he pushes the button in the center of the face of the curla, it's a starburst with a circle, and it goes click. And once he does that, the whole thing starts glowing, and you can feel everything happening to your brain as it happens, and it only takes moments. So he removed the headband that had the Perla device on it and said, "How do you feel?" And my face felt like it was on fire. And I was all red. I had this really horrible heat flush. And he says, "Everything will be fine." And he walked over to the counter where there was a sink, and he brought me a white cup full of water, and I downed it. And he goes, "Everything will be fine." And that's when he explained to me a process called lamellar hemimorphic electromagnetic distribution. And there's no such thing. You can look it up. I've already looked it up on Google a gajillion times. There are some interesting MRI things that might pop up if you punch that in. Hemimorphic lamellar electromagnetic distribution. So he explained to me how they did that, but he then told me he was sorry I'd lost the feeling that was connected to those memories. An interesting thing about his office, besides him and my treatment, was that all of the cupboard doors had no removable working parts, no nuts or bolts, and the doors on the cupboards, because they have cupboards too for storing stuff, they were like grown, but they grew separately so that they could never be disconnected, and yet they move. And it was fascinating. And the door to get out of his office was all black, pitch black, and it had a blue electric line on the inside of the door frame. And once you push your head through, you can see the entire outdoors. When you pull your head in, it's all black again. And so I walked through this door, and there was another entity. And there was nothing remarkable about him. In fact, he was very unhappy that he was having to take me to this giant gathering of scientists. They have emotions, but they're not the same as ours. And in fact, they love us a lot because we remind them what love is. And they love physical contact with humans that are safe because it helps them remember their pre-ancestry. Because we're all connected. The ones that you think are the most unusual looking with these magnificently large craniums that are almost eggshell thin are actually us. But they're sort of a version of us that's 25 or 35 million years along the path of evolution. And of course, they manipulate their own genes and genetics, and we could talk about that anytime you have a question. So I'm with this little fellow now, and he's a gray, but he has very interesting, I mean, if you were a phrenologist, you could hold your hand around his head and feel all these lumps. I mean, they have very pronounced brow, very pronounced cheekbones, a very slender little nose. There's so many unusual different types of species, but once again, totally unthreatened, totally no emotions. He's holding my hand, and we're walking through this grass field, and I can see the Colosseum some half a mile away that everyone is joining in, and there's thousands of these people walking in, and they're going upstairs to sit down. It's a beautiful white Colosseum. But then he diverts, and we go to this other white room. It's a box building, and all the white paths go over this really unique grass. The grass on the entire planet is all the same. It has 3 leaves, 3 blades, and it's always green, and it only grows 3 to 4 inches high. And it smells sweet, and it's nice to walk on. The trees are all the same, and they all look like giant translucent broccoli plants. They go up 200 feet, 300 feet, and they produce a beautiful, sweet nitrogen-oxygen blend because they breathe the same that we do. The oceans had no animal life in them, and they were all freshwater oceans. And the earth was this magnificent terracotta, beautiful dark red brown earth that smelled delicious, which anything would grow in except that it was just this grass and this type of tree. So it was sort of a safe place to bring biological entities that needed rescuing, needed housing, or needed to be brought for specific purposes, which could include manipulation, because I do know that we are being manipulated by them. I don't think in a bad way. They always leave us with something more wonderful. So when you feel like you've had an experience, they need to be with you for specific reasons because there are plans within plans within plans. So I'm pulled into this room by this little guy, and immediately my heart sunk. Floating are these giant black slabs with these really handsome, sort of chiseled, older U.S. military guys. And they're all in dark blue naval and Air Force military outfits, and they had these gold bands around their chests, their thighs, their legs, and their arms, and they're asleep. And these slabs are sort of hovering about 5 or 6 feet off the ground, and many of them looked like they were having nightmares. They were making sounds and shaking their head like they were having nightmares. It was very sad. Then this very tall being who was wearing a beautiful pearlescent white cloak or dress had this very long instrument in his hand. It looked like a hydrometer, like a very interesting hollow glass rod that was very delicate. And he would go up to one of these slabs where these officers were. And at the time that he'd gone up, he had touched this wand to this officer's forehead. I looked at the little guy and I said, "Are these officers being hurt?" And he says, "No, just watch." And I looked up, and this really beautiful, sort of angelic looking being took this tip away from their forehead with a real fast swipe, and with the air through this very strange, clear sinew that came out of their foreheads. It was like mucous membrane, and it had all these little glowing gold balls in it. And the tip of the wand extracted it from their forehead, and he'd flick it against this giant wall that was it was a sort of a half crescent shape, about 20 feet high, bent inwards, and it had the most fabulous arabesques and beautiful swirls had been engraved into this white wall, and they were all a perfect half-inch by a half-inch deep, but all the lines would go on for hundreds, if not thousands of feet. It was fabulous, fabulous swirls and whorls and all these different fabulous directions that these arabesques that were engraved into this white wall would go. And as soon as that mucous membrane splatted onto the wall, it would go boom, and take off. And there would be this fabulous, like, bright red glowing shape that produced some sort of red light signal. And then the doctor would punch something into this box like a curla, only a different type, and then hold it to them. And then after I was shown that, I was taken to the Colosseum. So what I found out, this is so hard to talk about without having some sort of feelings. They were helping them. They were taking these dignified U.S. soldier guys who held very high positions within the Department of Justice, the National Security Administration, the head of DARPA, the head of the French government, the head of the West German government, the head of the Japanese government. These were it wasn't just selective, but the ones that I was looking at were all from the U.S. And I come from a police and military family, so I know what these guys were legit. And he said they were returning their dignity because they were all given horrible injections by the U.S. government to do horrible things to children and people in other countries. And that these men were all being threatened by this sort of evil government, and that they were returning their souls by removing the horrible enzymatic toxins that were developed to control them emotionally. And that they would be returned to Earth to their same capacity, but they wouldn't be given the memory that they had been healed, only that they had been healed. And then Kim Jim told me 2 years later, he says, "David, we feel very much that if there is a fifth Space Force, and if they do have the funding for that, we don't think they do." He says, if they do fire on us, these wonderful, decent men will tell them no. And it broke my heart because they care so much about all the people that we think are evil and corrupt, and that it's beyond redemption to murder. It's beyond redemption to remove a life, because Kim Jim said only the divine creator can do that. So these horrible, horrible men were actually men that were forced to do those things by a much more evil regime than we would have any idea that's in charge of our government, the West German government, the Russian government, the French government. It's the same group who were creating all these evil catastrophes through the form of war and all these other terrible things. And so they're saving their souls by removing those horrible toxins that were injected into them. All of these beautiful human beings that joined the military for the right reasons were crippled and had their souls corrupted by these chemical implants. And so what they do is they remove them piecemeal from other countries, bring them to Broccoli and heal them, and then return them to their position. Isn't that interesting?
Did they happen to say what type of
it's
government
beyond.
did that? Did they happen to say what entity or what is doing all that?
I was so stunned by what I had been seeing that I really couldn't ask any questions at that point. Even though I was able to ask some questions when I was in presence, there's a whole level of amazement that washes over us as a primitive species. And so I was able to ask specific questions that I thought were important. And of course, they were all the wrong questions to ask at the time because it's such a stunning experience to be involved with them in full physicality. And I wasn't able to think about really in-depth questions about who they are. But Kim Jim did tell me that they were all being removed and that they were being given an option. The option is either to be publicly defrocked and thrown into prison by human beings or to be removed by a Stargate to a planet where they can all screw each other over, basically. But he didn't tell me what group they were, but that they had been manipulating mankind for some 6,000 years. And he said that they were all being removed. And actually, I understand that now because I've seen a lot of strange people who do really awful things sort of disappear. You know, whether that's Epstein or whether that's a member of the royal family or whether that's a big figure in the Catholic Church. We're watching these people, but you don't really find out what happens to them. They just sort of disappear. And they told me that they were giving these human beings an option. I did ask Kim Jim, I said, how come you can't just, wipe them all out based on the harmonic that they produce? He says, David, we don't murder, we don't kill, we can't do that. He said 6,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, yes, we actually created problems that wiped out large portions of very bad humans. Floods, earthquakes, plagues. He says we're not allowed to do that anymore. It's almost,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's almost like they have somebody watching them. And I recently had an experience where I was told that the Pleiadians, actually there's 3 or 4 types of Pleiadian, and that the very, very old ones are almost made of bright, dark blue light that has little star sparkles in them. And they're almost translucent, but they glow. They're glowing beings. They're so powerful, these ancient Pleiadians, that by a mere thought, they can decreate you or decreate your entire species. They're sort of like galactic police that only step in when it's really tragic or something really awful is about to happen. Otherwise, they're the sort of final say about legality. So when I walked away from these officers and will continue down this white path, I'm back outside heading towards the Coliseum. I get there, and there's an oval plinth or a round plinth with a railing, and it's a white railing. Everything's the same, sort of like made out of Corian. It wasn't either cold or warm. It was just the same. Everything I touched, all the buildings, all the things were all sort of the same temperature as my hand. It was a little odd. So I'm holding on to this railing, and this plinth raises up out of the ground about 150 feet. And all of a sudden, I have a clear view of 2 sides plus the bottom part of this auditorium filled with several thousand very unusual species from all over the galaxy. And in front of me directly are these very large white screens. There's about 25, 35 of them, and they're about 50 feet wide and 30 feet high. They're like proper cinema screens when you go see a movie. And I would hear a ping in the audience, and I'd look towards the direction of this ping, and then I'd get a question downloaded to me. And then I look at the screens, and all of the information that my mind had stored photographically that was relevant to the frequency I was sent would display on these screens all at once. So there would be not just some whales beaching, but it would be all the whale beachings over the last 40 years, all the nuclear waste piles over the last 50 years, all of the oil damage and fracking damage that's been done over the last 40 years. And now I'm starting to receive this feedback from them. And I'm feeling it like, you are not the one causing this problem, and we know that. But your species should not be allowed to be on your planet anymore because you don't know what you're doing. You have lost the idea of who you are. You have completely forgotten what your role is on that planet. And you're going to need to go back, and you're going to need to help us stop this. But we're not coming down to do a flood. We're not coming down to change you physically. We are going to make you feel so bad about your own decision-making processes that we'd be surprised if you'd want to live the next day because you're not alone. And before me had been another 100 humans giving their visual dissertation of the most shocking stuff. I guess some of them were related to concentration camp victims. And the species that are in this Colosseum cannot believe what we're doing to each other. You see, I know that we get lots of visitations, and there are a lot of species working with humanity right now. But there are thousands of species in this quadrant of our galaxy alone that had no idea about what we're doing. And so back in 2017, when I was releasing this information visually on these screens, that was very arduous. And about 4 hours later, I was completely exhausted. I was mentally exhausted. By that time, I had been there for 3 days. And I was lowered. The plinth came back down. And one of the ambassadors, or one of the entities that was there, came up to me and he says, "David, you are an amazing person. And there's somebody very special who wants to meet you. If you would just wait a moment." And I could see him coming down from the bleachers in this huge Coliseum, and he had an enormous head. He was bright, vivid, verdant green, and he had very interesting facial features, big black eyes. He had black eyebrows. They were like feathers. He had a big high green collar, and he had a cloak on that looked like emeralds. And he came up and he says, "I've traveled further than any other ambassador here just to listen to you because I know Kim Jim. And Kim Jim is very important to the Taurus sector. And if Kim Jim says you're important, I traveled all the way from Andromeda. And for me, that's a long way." And he says, "Thank you very much for coming, David." And then the other one took my hand. And that's the last thing I remember. And I woke up. But it wasn't just waking up in bed. I was standing on my feet. There was a loud electrical explosion in my hallway outside my son's door. And it woke William up with a start. And he's watching these like sparks sort of disappear and drop through the floor. I'm wearing somebody else's t-shirt. It's brown and orange and red from the 70s, and it smelled funny. And was also, I'm an extra large, and it was a medium, so they really packed me in it. And then I was really, really thirsty. I hadn't been given a drink in 4 days, except for the one I got from the Joey-to-Er doctor. And I went into the kitchen, and I grabbed our sparklets bottle and sat down on the edge of my son's bed, and I drank 2.5 gallons of water nonstop, and I put the bottle down, and my son's eyes were sticking out, and his mouth was open. He says, "What happened to you?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Go look in the mirror." My hair was all greasy and disheveled. I had 4 or 5 days beard growth, and I smelled bad. And I take a shower every night before I go to bed because, I'm Swedish. I have anal retentive Swedish hygiene issues. So I always take a shower in the morning and a nice hot, quick shower in the evening, because I want to be clean. So I shave every night before I go to bed. And bloody hell, I woke up and I looked like I'd been dragged through some really bad neighborhood and left to rot for 4 days. And I'm thinking, wow, so much for hygiene and so much for, the beautiful smock they put me in. But I don't remember my trip home, but I imagine it was somewhat similar to the one out there, except that I was knocked out. There was no point in talking to me anymore. Weimer is the one that started my road to mathematics. When he folded me in my tubular chair and said, this is the part everyone likes the most, he didn't expect me to start asking him questions. And so he was standing there, and I said, what keeps the micrometeorites from destroying our ships? How come we can fly so fast? What's our current speed? And I started hitting him with all these questions. And I wasn't smart enough to understand his answers. So he did the same thing that Kim Jib did to me, is he touched the side of my face and my temple with his fingers, and he downloaded a huge amount of higher mathematics and physics to me. And so I think it's because, really on hindsight, and I've only realized this about a year ago, I think it's because he felt bad that he got stuck with a stupid human and he didn't have anything interesting to talk about. So he downloaded all that stuff to me to make me interesting, at least to talk to. Anyways, he finished my mathematics theorem teaching so that we had this really beautiful, lucid conversation about stellar cartography and optical phenomena. And he downloaded a whole bunch of abilities that I never had before. One was to be receptive and cogent of easily understanding higher physics and higher mathematics. And so, I never liked mathematics. My mom was an animal activist and a hippie, and she said the only thing mathematics is good for is to balance your checkbook. And so by the time I got done with my trip to Broccoli, I was already well on my way to university to go get a degree in higher mathematics. In fact, on the ship, they have a creche for young visitors. And it could be, if you're a species that's a year old, or if you're a young species, they have an interesting creche. And it's a large part of the ship, and they have toys. And they have children's toys. They have what we would refer to as a STEM toy. They have the most, even the toys for their babies are so fabulous that when I got done playing with them for 20 or 30 minutes, I walked out of there feeling like Einstein. They gave me patterns and downloads and explained everything. A lot of humans don't understand. Let me tell you guys, they have relations just like we do. They have physicality. They have forms of love that they express with each other. They garner nurturing and they garner respect and protective emotions. They give life birth. Some of them need assistance technologically, and some of them have changed themselves so severely genetically from thousands of generations living in space that they can't bear offspring anymore, and they need to replicate themselves like clones. But there aren't a lot of species like that. They have relations, and I thought that was really beautiful. In fact, everywhere I went on the ship, when I was allowed to walk around on the way to Broccoli, when we got off the chair and walked around, everyone was holding hands. All sorts of beautiful species, blues, yellows, greens. I think I even saw some reptilians, and they were really pretty, and everyone seemed to be appreciating them. And I'd always heard reptilians were all evil, but I saw all sorts of different species, and they were all sort of in love with each other. It was really harmonious, and everybody got along. And I didn't feel like I was the only human there. I didn't feel like I wasn't welcome. People looked at me and they understood far beyond what I could ever understand about what my purpose was there. But it was to release everything that I'd ever collected over my life, because apparently I'm a pretty observant fella. And so I pay close attention to Mother Earth because I love her dearly. But I have since day one because of my parentage. I've always fought for the planet or worked with wildlife. And, it just made sense that they wanted to hear it from me, because I spent 18 years of my life with big cats on the Shambhala Preserve with the actress Tippi Hedren and Melanie Griffith and my mom. She was their number one animal behaviorist. My mom and Alex Newman and Tippi Hedren were the three gals that came up with affection training, that no animal should ever be struck. We came up with all sorts of laws that changed the way that animals were going to be handled at circuses. We did nothing but good for the world and for people. We'd go around to schools educating people by taking a lion cub. I can't tell you how many hours I spent on educational platforms with high schoolers or grade schoolers talking about the importance of preserving all animals on the planet, you know. But they love that about me. And the thing about species that are from other planets is that they love us very dearly. We're all connected, but more importantly, they appreciate what's known as the diaspora of the Creator. It's that we're part of the great creation of all life. It isn't because we're special. If you look, really, there's no animal that's less special than we are. We just manipulate our environment differently than the animals that we don't pay attention to or try and spray with insecticides. Spiders, praying mantises, even amoeba or euglenas, parameciae, all of those, you know, multicellular, small, molecular-sized organisms, they all have the right to live. And so when you truly respect life and you truly understand your place within it, then you reach a higher love. And I was given sort of notification from Kim Jim that I'm special. And he says, David, all I want you to do is always be honest about your experience with us. He said, we will protect you. You will always be fine. You're never going to get shot. You'll always be taken care of. I'll tell you the day that you're going to pass away, and you're going to be 93 years old when you go. So he said, I want you to use every day. Every day is a special gift. And so I'm so happy to share my experience, but also to let people know that there are so many wonderful things beyond the paradigm that we're all being sold, that all you have to do is love yourself and love everybody around you, because the thoughts are truly things. The human mind is so very powerful. If you concentrate on something long enough, it'll happen. We have a direct effect on the environment around us just by the space we inhabit, let alone what we want in life. So if you have a powerful mind and you're connected to your soul and you have your heart in Gaia and you have your head in the stars, you'll get whatever you want in life just by the thoughts that you keep. And it's funny, too, because I always think nice things about people. I never think bad things about people, because that's terrible. Who wants to be thought of that way? I'm not a racist. I'm not critical of behavior, and I don't make jokes. I don't crack jokes about anything unless it's an allegory or a metaphor. I mean, I crack jokes about humanity's behavior, but never one is in regards to a serious subject. The thing that they did to me, I always thought I was a grateful person. And I didn't know that I wasn't really a grateful person. But when they returned me home, I've been grateful for life every day. So I practice gratitude in the morning by saying thank you to the Creator. And I send a prayer for all animals and people to find harmony and friendship. And then at night, I find gratitude and I say a prayer for life. And I thank the Divine Creator for all of the love and friendships that I have. And if there's any way I can serve my fellow man, to please let me know in my dreams. And I do this every night. And so I've had a lot of really interesting dreams and a lot of interesting astral experiences. But I'm lucky to also have a continued physical experience. They come into my home, they wake me up, they sit on the edge of my bed, and they talk to me. And usually the first thing they always say is, David, are you okay? Is everything okay? Is there anything that you want? Always. Now, Kim Jim said on the ship when he said goodbye, he said that I love you very much, David. I always have. I will see you exactly in 2 years. So on January 7th, 2019, Kim Jim came into my house, just him. And he woke me up, and I went into the kitchen with him. And he stood there at my kitchen counter. I got on the stool, and he waited for me to wake up all the way. And he said, how are you? He said, I think about you all the time. He says, you're like my son. And he said, do you want to stay? Do you want to stay? And I said, yes, please. I said, I have my son, William. And he says, that's what we love about you, David. He says, you could have anything, but nothing is as strong as your love for your son. And then he said, I'll see you in 2 years. And so in 2019, 2021, 22, he came back 2 years later, and he asked the same question. But this time I was up. I was doing my maths homework. It was 2 a.m, and he came into the kitchen and stood there next to me, and he said, "Is everything okay? Is there anything that you want? Can I help you with anything?" And of course, the answer is always no, because I always feel so blessed just to be around him. And he says, "Do you want to stay?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Is it because of William?" I said, "Yeah, but also I have some work to do." He goes, "That's why we love you." And he just goes, he floats, and he turns into a blue light, and he goes right through the balcony window and goes up into space. So you'll have to forgive me. I'm not an emotional person that often. So he's coming back, and he'll be here this January 7th to see if I'm okay and to see if I want to stay. So this time I'm going to ask him if it's, I've got his photo, and Vivian, you've seen the interior ship of the other celestial craft that picked me up, and he's sitting there. In fact, I went on Becca B's, Becca up in Spokane, and she showed, I gave her some photographs, she put them up. I hope they imparted the feeling that they're meant to feel. And Kim Jim is like my teacher, mentor, and dad. He's sort of, even though he looks younger than me, I know that Kim Jim's probably at least 350, 400 years old in this form that he's in. And he really cares about me. And it's so nice to have that friend, because every time I feel bad or anytime I'm under attack, because I have had some issues with agents coming into my shop and threatening me, he always shows up or sends me a signal, some sort of confirmation from the heavens that I'm being looked out after. So it's really been tremendous. And every part of the experience I've had has been full of dignity and love. It's been full of compassion, love, and dignity. Super, super caring, super much in love with humanity. They love us very much. They would love it if they could come into your home and sit down with you and let you drink a cup of tea and talk to you. And they get so excited when you realize that they're there and that you can communicate with them. They're so chatty. They want to talk about where they're from, who their families are, what planets they've seen. They're so fascinating. And I've met, probably been in close proximity because of my trip to Broccoli to about 400 different species. I've had direct physical contact and conversations with at least 20. And we have such a wonderful family in outer space around this planet, you guys. And it is so cool. It is so cool. It is like, okay, here's an example. I got a young man who found out that I was a contactee, and he's a beautiful guy. He comes from a nice family, a nice middle-class kid. He works hard at school, and he came in the shop and he was in tears because he keeps seeing these interstellar conveyance, these spaceships, and they keep showing themselves to him. And he was wondering if I could help him. And I said, of course I can help you. So let's go sit in my garden. We'll meditate. We'll say a prayer for love to God. We'll talk to God. We'll ask for God's forgiveness and ask that God fills our heart with love, and that we would like to see our brothers from another star system and to have a greater definition of your experience. So let's ask for that gift. So we meditated on this prayer for about 25, 35 minutes in my garden here at the bakery. Then I walked him and my son down to the beach at twilight. We sat on our meditation cushions, and we're watching some fog roll in from the Palos Verdes Peninsula. And right then, when we looked to the south, these two enormous orange saffron gold glowing ships came up out of the water near Catalina Island and made their way through the fog over Palos Verdes Peninsula and came towards us. And so I put my hand on this boy's shoulder who's staring straight ahead, and I said, "There's your friends." He just started bawling, but it was so amazing for him. I said, so I translated for him. I said, "They love you very much." They said, "Don't worry." He said, "Anytime," they didn't mean to scare you. He said, "They want to talk to you about your star family. They want to talk to you about your questions and answers. when you're ready, he says, they will come and see you, and they will never do anything to make you frightened because they love you. And then as soon as I told him that, these two ships just went and disappeared into themselves like a little dot, and then they just disappeared. And so he was like in tears. And I've stayed in touch with him. He's a nice guy. And so I don't know if I'm a healer. I don't think I am. I think what I am is a translator. And I think I can help translate people's own phenomenal experience by being around ships and explain to them how the ships work, how they're able to travel through outer space, and what type of languages they use to communicate with each other. And one of them is through light. And it was much later that I finally got to listen to and talk to Alex Collier. And it turns out that Alex knew all about advanced light communication systems between Andromedans. That they sort of have this flashing light at their forehead and they send it back and forth to each other. Well, I met an Andromedan. His name is L. And right in the middle of my midterms, he came in. I was crying. It was like 3 a.m. And I'm a big guy. When I like to cry, I guess. And I just couldn't figure out this mathematics homework, and I didn't want to fail because I'd made it already through 2.5 years at university. And so he told me to relax. And then he stood there and went like this, and he moved a bunch of lenses and magnifying glasses around until I received the function of the equation I was working on properly. And it was about light exchange and transmitting light signals, and it was also about light values. And it goes into Einstein-de Broglie theorem about light packages, but it also talks about the Gedanken experiment, about photons of light and how they travel. And so he was able to give me all that information, introduce himself to me, and then disappear. And this was after my visit. So what Kim Jim had done for me, much like the doctor had done for NSA officers who were tortured and who were malaligned or given chemicals to make them do horrible things, much like them, I was given this physical association to be able to not pass judgment on them and to be calm and be loving and at peace when they're in presence with me. And it's been the greatest gift of my life, aside from having a son who loves me.
Oh, absolutely. You have a wonderful son, and Peter and I had a joy to spend some time together in Mount Shasta. David, there's so many takeaways from your most unique, very empowering, and so loving experiences. And I can feel that we needed to hear all of it in the perspective of where we are right now moving forward. Um, Based on your experience and, of course, what it taught you, what your own metamorphosis and all of it, what message would they have for humanity at this point of where we are?
That's a beautiful question, and I'm so glad you asked that. The message that I have received most recently, was actually within the last 5 weeks, is that regardless of what we do to ourselves, that is not necessarily in line with the power of life and the power of love. He said, regardless of what we do to ourselves, they will always love us more than we know. And that we are here to help now. And he said, now is the most important time. He said, David, the past is a precious place where fear, anguish, anxiety, and pain can be left forever, never to affect us again. He said, right now is the most important time. The message he also gave me was that please don't try and control the beautiful experience that's being brought to each of us on an individual level. That there's no way to control the divine and to accept it and to just be in line with it, because they're receiving and they're sending us great gifts that are here for the taking. He said, now is the wonderful time to ask the universe to bless you with abundance, to bless the planet with renewed life. Now is a wonderful time to look up to the skies and start asking, because the gifts that we ask for will all be granted. He said, now is this time. And he says, so just remember that hope and love are your two greatest attributes. And love is the most powerful energy in the whole universe. And everything is based on it. That they love the divine creator just as much as we could ever hope to. And that they all operate within those guidelines as well, but in a much higher, more organized way than we could possibly do right now in this stage of our evolutionary process, because they know we're going through such painful changes right now. And they're aware of these things, and they want to support every aspect that we show them that we are worth saving, that we have this beautiful inherent gift of knowing what real suffering is and knowing the difference between right and wrong, and that we can have a loving, beautiful, giving day every day, because every day of life is a precious gift, and there's beautiful things all around us that we could be doing. When I asked Kim Jin if God existed when I first met him, he felt a little sorry for me that I didn't understand. And he said, in the infinite creator's wisdom, the infinite creator never produced anything in the universe that would cause you to have fear. He said those are all manifestations of the human experience from your very earliest beginnings. He said that the universe is full of love and light, charity and hope. And these are the highest aspects that we would love to see in you. Once you remove the aspects that are negative and replace them with forgiveness, love, compassion, and kindness, he said it automatically you'll be able to attenuate the regions of your mind that can create whatever you want. So I live with that beautiful knowledge every day. And so whoever comes into my all-natural pie shop, if they need to hear it, I'm going to tell them how dearly that they're loved and how much hope there is. Because we're moving into a beautiful, beautiful future for the planet. Everybody who cares about the planet, who cares about Gaia, who cares about themselves and loves themselves, we will all be able to move forward into a brand new world, which is coming very quickly for all of us. And that we should all try and be forgiving and patient, and that we should all try and be as kind as possible to one another and never make fun of each other, and to never make fun of anybody who is in the process of having that veil removed, because they understand that we're going through a transhumanist experience, which is not necessarily good for our evolutionary beginning. They understand that we're being poisoned by ourselves with pharmaceuticals and chemicals in the waterway. They're working with very strong people to help us make those changes, but we also have to consider those changes for the planet's health actively every day. This isn't something where it can be washed away just by saying, oh, yes, I supported this cause once. It has to be something we do every day. So just pick one thing and be really good at it, and just express your love through that one beautiful gift that you have to share with all of humanity. And so I just try and do that every day. And that's what happened from my experience. Like I said, I thought I was a grateful person, but when they returned me to Earth, I understood what gratitude is.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Oh, yeah, on a whole different level that we are rediscovering more and more here.
Oh, my.
And David, this is absolutely of the chart. I mean, we're so grateful that you're here. And I can tell you, I've
Thank
been
you.
monitoring the chat room. Oh, you're so welcome. I've been monitoring the chat room very closely. And people feel so much love. They relate to you. They felt it in their being. It brings
Wonderful.
validation. Yes, very much so. David, you
Wonderful.
talk about your writings. You talk about also what you're going to be bringing in terms of the abstract, the full four new quantum physics science. Where will these writings be available? Meaning, is there a public place when they can
Okay,
people?
that's a great question. One moment, please.
Okay.
Um, thanks. It's sort of the aftermath of feeling emotions. Um, everything that I'm working on as far as hyperphysics and quantum theory is interconnected. And I'll explain it very easily, and I know that both of you will grasp this. There are four main aspects, and I've been taught this from Weimer, and believe me, he's an authority. And I've discussed this also with people like Dr. Professor Richard Friend from Cambridge University, who happens to be the head of the mathematics department, and with people at Purdue University and MIT and Caltech. I've discussed this with some university mathematics department heads, and they're kind of going like this. This is like making sense, but they don't have the time to work on it right now. There's four main aspects to reality that all creatures, whether you're third dimensional, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth dimensional, that all creatures feel. And if you looked at them like four bars in a row, it would be time, light, gravity, and sound. Sound is very unusual. What I'm working on with sound is that there's something called the fractal sound continuum. That when you hear a sound, like, it's only human ego that makes you believe that if you're not hearing that anymore, that the sound has vanished into the ethers. But actually, that sound goes on forever. It travels away from you in a form of exotic energy that we cannot see or hear because we haven't developed the technology to understand it as a continuum frequency. Sound is a form of energy, and around the universe exists sort of an amorphic sphere or a blob that resounds energy back. It recycles the sound of exploding stars or trees that fall and sends that energy back in the form of, sends that sound reverberation back in the form of an energy wave. And the energy wave can be collected according to a specific technology. If you go to time, light, or gravity, you understand that gravitation is not a constant. It doesn't have a constant. It can be a constant depending on several things, specifically what your location is and what you're near. But your gravitation can change, whether it's a black hole or a supergiant star, or if you're sitting under an apple tree like Newton, right? Gravitational waves change. They can fluctuate, and they can work in concordance with time. Time is viewed by humanity as a constant. It has an infinite end and an infinite beginning. That is to say that it's not a loop, it's not an open loop or a closed loop, but that it's a line, and that all experiences of gravitation, sound, and light work in coordination around time for you to have physicality and exist and have consciousness of existence. Time, light, gravity, and sound. Well, now light is where I specialize in physics. Light can be absorbed, it can be bent, it can be diffracted, it can be diffused, it could be sent, it could be stopped, it could be increased. Light is so malleable and wonderful. One of the things that I'm working on right now is getting light to stop moving and to remain as a static constant without replicative fade or side lobe light waste. What I'm working on is actually a magnet, a sealed box, a chamber that has several things added to it, which causes it to arrest light's photic traveling value. You see, no matter what theorem you go look at or what scientist or PhD in physics you speak to, they still don't know why light travels. Okay? Light is a combination of many photons or a single photon. Einstein and Broglio proved that you can have a package of light, and that package of light can travel probably infinitely depending upon where that infinite space is designed for that light to travel. Or it could be absorbed, deflected, or destroyed. But you see, with time, light, gravity, and sound, if you remove any one of those four basic components of the reality in which all of us exist, the other three collapse. You cannot have gravity and sound and light without time, because there's no framework in which to understand and cognate the human experience or their experience or any animal's experience. You take away gravitation, well, then nothing will be formed. You take away light and nothing will be seen. But you can't go into Heidelberg, you can't go to Cambridge or Oxford and be taught that. I had to get that from a Beyond Earth Sentient who explained that the grand unified theory is not not the correct thing to be working on. It is not the grand unified theory. He said, if you want to understand how to travel through space very, very quickly, you must learn and study what it is that exists in the nature between the four main aspects of your conscious reality. What is it that holds and causes the relationship between time, light, gravity, and sound? It is the nature of this scientific secret which binds reality in a web that once you understand the nature of that reality, then anything that you could infinitely wish can happen. You can travel 1,000,000 times the speed of light and arrive within yesterday in perfect shape. He said it's just nothing is going to be impossible. But those are the things that you need to concentrate on as a mathematician is time, light, gravity, and sound. And once you start breaking those different components down about the reality in which we exist, you'll start to understand what binds them and why things happen the way they happen. So my 4 papers are based on that thesis. It's another form of the grand unified theory, but it's not the grand unified theory. And so it's given me quite a bit to work on. The other one is the maths language, CLPF. I've taken the nomenclature of known physics formula and equation, which are written out by human beings because we're three-dimensional. We write things out on a second-dimensional format, whether you're using a stylus and you're using cuneiform in a clay tablet, or you're writing in Japanese and you're writing up and down to the left, or if you're studying English and you're writing on a college-ruled pad. It's always a pen or a piece of chalk writing a single-dimensional figure on a two-dimensional platform to show to your three-dimensional friends. Well, there's something wrong with that. Human beings need to start accessing those regions of their mind that help them describe and explain what 3, 4th, and 5th dimensional functionality is. If you looked at a page with many different alphabet letters on it and you just chose one letter, say it's the letter A, lift with your mind's eye, lift that A off the page, that two-dimensional flat ink drawing, and then turn it upright and turn it into a three-dimensional tube that's shaped like the letter A. It has a unique character. It fills the dimensionality of the space in which it exists. You can cast light past it to see an interesting shadow that the letter A now produces. Now take that A and put it back down to its two-dimensional format on that one-dimensional piece of paper. Now think about physics language in the very same way. We spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on a chalkboard writing out the minutia of thousands of different little symbols, hypertext, and mathematic nomenclature that we need to express higher values in mathematics. Mu naught, epsilon naught, del dot, hat 1 over r squared equals vector plus function. Instead of writing all that out, what about taking those symbols as a linear format, turning them this way, and then shining a light through them, and see what the ultimate function of the stack of those symbols is as a value of a single symbol. You can take Einstein's equations, which are some, for relativity, which are some 3,470 little bits of symbology. And if you put those all into one line, well, you just end up with a big black squiggly blob. But there's another mathematics formula called Euler's formula, which allows you to break down higher forms of knowledge into more countable, easily understood components. So using Euler's formula, I'd be able to take Einstein's theory of electromagnetic or Einstein's theory of relativity and turn that into some 32 single symbols instead of 4,000. And each one of those symbols carries the same function of the equation. So I could teach those 32 symbols to you in 2 hours instead of 7 years. So by the time that you get out of high school, you'll already have a PhD in physics. And this is how the Andromedans teach math to their children. It's how Kim Jin got taught math when he was a little boy. It's through these fabulous, here's the symbol, here's what the symbol does, move to the next one. Okay, so in humanity, in our understanding of cosmology and physics, there's 11 branches of physics. nuclear sciences, astrological physics, optical physics. There's 11 main branches: gravitational physics, thermodynamics. All right. So, and each one of those branches probably has 600 million to a billion formulas. So it would almost be a titanic, impossible task to turn every one of those formulas into a singular line and turn each one of those into a single symbol. But once you start that project, you can populate an AI with my quantum hypertext, because that's basically what it is, and it will self-replicate and then grow that mathematics language exponentially, so that a new assemblage of higher physics can be reached. The really interesting thing about this language is that they attribute a different sound wavelength to each symbol. So if Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism is only 32 symbols, then I could turn it lengthwise and then use Euler's formula and make maybe 4 symbols to explain Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism. Each symbol would have a different sound. So it would be So when you hear that's the sound of Maxwell's electromagnetic theory. So each formula now has a sound. So if I went to Einstein's, which has 3,400, but I turn that into 32 symbols, Einstein's theory in this quantum hypertext sounds like this. So it's really interesting. And so when they speak to each other and they go, they're transferring the audible value of the mathematic formula's geometric shape, and then you get it, and then your mind decollapses it into its component form so that you have complete cognition of the function.
That's called quadmonics.
Wonderful. See, that's why I'm here. So now you're going to have to explain this to me when we can talk and send emails back and forth. Quadmonics, it's a great name. What does it mean?
Exactly what you're talking about symbols that are created with sound or utilizing sound to explain a million different pages of information.
Where did you get this information?
The Ponte. It's in my paper.
Wonderful. Oh my God. Okay, so quadmonics.
I mean, whatever you talked about today, yeah, I'm with you 100%.
Wonderful, because that's a great name, because it is a fourth dimensional representation of
dimensional communication.
Right. It's a communication key as well. Okay, so one of the really spooky aspects about this is I took a simple coefficient. I used the coefficient for rotational and angular kinematics. And this is a coefficient that you would consider if you're putting spin on a rocket and you want to think about the Earth's angle as opposed to the Lagrange point to Mars. And so if I'm going to make a rocket, I'm going to have to think about my rotational and angular kinematics. And of course, kinematics is traveling and vectors and all that. So I put those 7 or 11 symbols together. I stacked them in one of my symbol lenses, and I showed this to Vivienne when she came out to Shasta, and her and Peter came over and had dinner with my son and I. And I showed a light through it. It makes the form of a pyramid with a little man standing in front of it holding a 3-meter, like a cubit stick. It is so crazy. So what I started doing is I started looking at these other coefficients. And sure enough, every time I shine a light through all of these stacks of formulas, when it's a complete formula, not a Euler's formula breakdown of a longer equation, but when it's a formula that's maybe 15, 20, 30 different pieces of information that you can still see through it, when you shine a bright light through it, it creates a unique geometric shape, which oftentimes is a physical representation of the name of the formula in the first place. And I'm like, what? So now my son and I are we've rented a rapid prototyper. And we put some of these symbols through a rapid prototyper to produce a plastic 3-dimensional image of these higher equations. And you've heard of a Gombach, right? Mm-hmm. They're like ultra Gombach. and they're really strange. And I have a sneaking suspicion that if we produce enough of these, especially these three-dimensional shapes from the 11 branches of physics, that once we get them produced as a hollow plastic form, that they'll start to fit together like pieces in a puzzle. So it's an ongoing maths discovery that I'm working on, and I found some really wonderful old laboratory equipment that allows me to put these different math symbols into a series of lenses so that I can design formulas and check for accuracy and check to make sure that the symbols, once they're compressed into a single symbol, could then be decollapsed. And so I've spoken to some very wonderful people, including some unusual folks at Neuralink. And there's some applications for higher mathematic languages which I have to be very savvy about not releasing to people that have government contacts, because every time we are intuited to come up with a higher mathematics language, it's always taken away from us and then used for the wrong things. So before I release this information, Vivian, to answer your question, you can't copyright mathematics because mathematics is deemed as something that benefits the entire planet. So no one has the right to copyright a formula that benefits the world, right? So, but what I will do is to make sure that it's released all at the same time and that it's sent out through venues like both of yours rather than sent off to Cambridge or sent off to Heidelberg, because I've already spoken to my professors to get sort of some validation about some suspicions I'd had on other things to go ahead and spend the rest of my days pursuing this. What was the name that you came up with?
Quadmatics.
Quadmatics, right? That makes sense. Quadmatics, but
have you ever used tetravalent logic in any of your equations?
Not a lot, but yeah, I'm aware of it.
Okay. Yeah, that's going to be important for everybody to understand.
Well,
this Aristotle logic is not going to last in the universe.
Right. It's funny, too, because we were just talking about Nicomachean ethics. And so, when you talk about making sure that you do the right thing with the information that you possess, Aristotle was one of the winners there. He was very conscientious about how thoughts are things and how when we produce a new idea, we have to be careful to make sure that it benefits mankind when the information gets out there. And I would love to email you later and find out more about it, because it sounds like it's very, very, very similar to what I'm doing. And I've shown a lot of these three-dimensional light images that I put together to Vivian and Peter. When they visited, I brought my projector and some lenses up that I'd done. And it's pretty fascinating stuff, isn't it, Vivian?
Yeah, absolutely amazing. It's beyond words. We have to wrap up. We're way above the time, but it was just so important. And I do have a class and healing session coming up, so I cannot stay online any longer.
That's
David,
cool.
We can stay here for 3 hours easily. It has been above and beyond. A level of gratitude to you. It's immense, of course. We send you our love.
Thank you so much. I love you guys a lot. And if there's anything I can do to support both of you, just please let me know. And if, anybody else needs some support or love and you think that they need to talk to me, just go ahead and pass them my details. Okay. And let me know in advance. I'm a simple person. I try and keep it as simple as possible. The most valuable thing about life is to remember to love each other, to always be kind, and to always think kind thoughts, because they hear our thoughts 24/7, and they just love it when we reprogram ourselves to be the kind, loving people that we already know we are. So I love you guys. You just have a wonderful day, and the honor was all mine. Many blessings.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I got your email, so I'll hook up with you later on.
I can't wait, dude. That's so awesome. I am so happy. I felt something between us. I wasn't sure what it was, and bang, it's like a gift from the gods.
Cool.
That's all
Somebody
about
knows what I'm talking about. Finally.
Thanks, guys.
Right.
It's all about the quantum. Thank you very much. Will join us for our last episode of 2022 next Sunday, December 18. Same time, 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So next Sunday, December 18, we'll review 2022 in perspective. We'll navigate through the field, answer questions, and much more. So tune on tune in, next Sunday for as we're wrapping 2022 here on the Infinite Star Connections. David, much joy, a lot of love. Jeff, my friend, always a pleasure. Sending you love as well. Stay in your light, stay awesome, and we will see you pretty soon. Namaste, everyone.